Good evening or hello. Thanks for joining us, whether you're here in the audience now or watching on YouTube at a later date. Thanks for coming. We're going to be talking to Kevin Brazier for the second time. It's his second book with Barnthorne Publishing now. This time about his book on the Scottish VCs. So, Kevin, would you like to introduce yourself? Could you tell us a bit about you?
Yeah, sure. I first really became aware of the VC when I was a mere lad of 17 on a trip to the Imperial War Museum and saw the medal there awarded to first class boy John Cornwall, who at the time was 1 year younger than I was. So that sort of sparked my interest in it, and I've kind of always kept an interest in it. We've all seen the Zulu growing up as about the Victoria Cross was awarded there. And then where was I? Around my late 40s, I thought, I'll try a little project. I thought all the books I have, they all list VCs alphabetically. So I thought I'd have a go at listing them chronologically. And that was a real big task. And by the time I'd finished it, I'd collected so much information. I thought, yeah, I could put this into a book. And I'm like, I'm dyslexic. I left school pretty much unable to read and write. Me write a book, they're gonna laugh. But I thought I'd give it a go. So originally, the book was only going to be, I was going to list everybody, but I was only going to do the stories of probably 100 and 150 of the most, for want of a better word, interesting stories, and call it the bravest of the brave. And then you start deciding which ones to go out and which ones to put in, and then there's all the grey areas, of which there are a lot. And in the end, I decided I can't leave anyone out. We have to have them all in. So not only did I set out not to write a book, I set out the book I wrote was not the book I intended to write in the first place. Um, Once completed, I must have written to 50 odd publishers. Most don't reply. Um, you get a few no's and feel, oh, interesting, but not for us. And eventually I got a publisher who's agreed to do it. And when I've done that, I've not looked back really. I've gone from book. In fact, this Scottish book will be my 10th. That is my 10th published book.
Oh, that's brilliant. You've obviously you've got the writing bug, and I guess through that, through these 10 books now, you would have come across so many fascinating stories, and I think obviously although the Victoria Cross is very much a gallantry award, I think it's not necessarily always the actions which attract. It's also perhaps the peculiarities of which maybe the awards come about, or the first time this had happened, or the only time something else had happened. And I mean, are there what I guess which of the VCs, and it's probably maybe hard to narrow down, but which do you find most intriguing?
You're absolutely right. I mean, politics has always played a part in the Victoria Cross Award, and even newspaper campaigns have helped as well. Um, but for me, one of the most fascinating stories is Sir Evelyn Wood, who joined the Navy as a young lad, as a midshipman, and he ended up as a field marshal. He fought in every major war from the Crimea to the First World War. He was a deaf, accident-prone hypochondriac. He was wounded 6 times. He was so vain, it was even said that he probably wore his ribbons on his pajamas. It's almost certainly untrue, but he did mount his ribbons on black cloth to make them take up more room on his chest. And it was some people often commented to him and said, "Oh, you seem to have a few there I don't recognise." So yeah, an incredible character. He's written his own book from midshipman to field marshal. Other books have been written on him. Um, just an amazing character.
Yeah, and I guess he features in well at least one of your books, if not others.
He obviously features in the first book, as they all do, and he also features in the VCs of the Gurkha and Indian regiments because he was in a Indian regiment at the time of his award.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously, in your travels, I mean, you've been to all over the place, visiting locations or museums, etc., connected to these stories, and you've obviously had the opportunity of having a lot, being able to see and hold a lot of the VCs. Is that right?
Indeed, I've lost count of the actual number, but it's in excess of 50. VCs now. I've been invited to various museums just to go and look at the VC collection. I did some volunteering at the National Army Museum,
Hmm.
and I got to hold all of the VCs in their collection, um, including Sir Evelyn Woods, which was a real treat considering he was one of my top VC men. But the very first one I held was that of Sidney Godley, the famous machine gunner from Nemi Bridge in the First World War, who is buried in my local cemetery, and I knew nothing about him until I started the research of the book. I met his grandson, and I was very lucky enough to hold his Victoria Cross.
Brilliant. Is that one still, is that held by the family still, or is it?
No, sadly now the family made the decision to sell it, and sadly it went out of the country. It went to a private bar in the US.
Right. Well, hopefully looked after still. So
Undoubtedly.
for that money, I'm sure.
Yes.
Um, so I guess coming back to this book, so the Scottish VCs, you'd written 9 books before this. Why the Scottish VCs as your next subject?
That's a good question, and surprisingly enough, I get asked it a little bit. I was looking after the previous one. I was looking for another book to do, um, and I thought, well, regionals would be interesting because you can't do, there's far too many English. There'll be probably over 1,000, whereas the border countries, there's considerably less, and makes it for a more concise book. You can get all of them in. Um, so it is possible that at some later stage there could be an Irish or a Welsh book, or in fact, a Canadian Facebook friend of mine has already asked me if I would do a Canadian one based on the fact that I've done a Scottish book. So you never know. Um,
Well, I
one of the
guess.
biggest problems of this book was deciding how to decide who was a Scottish VC.
Hmm,
And I decided that really the only way you could properly do it is to those that were born in Scotland.
yeah.
So there are some peculiarities, so some that people probably think should be in and aren't. But I just thought it was the only fair way to do it. I've seen other regional books, counties, and and their selection process was all over the place, and I didn't want to go down that kind of route.
Yeah, yeah. I guess as you say, because if you, oh well, at one point they lived in Scotland, or they're buried in Scotland, or whichever different criteria you use. But I think perhaps the being born there probably goes for a lot. So, and how many guys from of that nature are in the book?
156.
156. And you said obviously the number of English VCs is significantly more, but obviously when you
Yeah,
focus on these regions, and I guess in perhaps if you were to view the subject as a whole, it might be perhaps a bit overwhelming. But if you can focus on an area, so whether it's to do with certain wars, like your previous book with us, Queen Victoria's Little Wars, which nicely kind of portioned that up. You've got other books on different wars, etc. So yeah, I guess that's an advantage perhaps to read about all of these in one place.
yeah, sure, for sure. I was surprised. There were so many good stories for that previous book that very few people know about because they're in very obscure wars that people are generally not interested in. I mean, you got I think one of the double VCs was there. No, it wasn't. Oh, that's wrong. You've got William Manley, who's a very interesting story, and he's in one of those wars. Um, so yeah, there was loads of fascinating stories that people just don't usually read about.
Yeah. And I think obviously because you've taken the view of grouping them by the fact that they were born in Scotland, it allows for quite a cross section of warfare because it's from the some of the earliest awards right the way through to the Second World War. I don't know if you want to say about a bit about how the book's structured in that sense by the different wars.
Yeah, it is done by conflict pretty much, and I was actually surprised myself how many different wars it included. I expected it to be a lot more recent ones. I don't know why. That was just a preconception I had. But the book starts in the Crimea. It goes through the Persian War and the Indian Mutiny, the Third China War, the Second Mari War, the Bhutan War, two of the Ashanti Wars, the Second Afghan War, the Second Boer War, the First World War, the Arab revolts, and the Second World War. Interestingly, there have been none since the Second World War.
Hmm. I suppose generally speaking, the number of VCs post Second World War is probably quite small relative to say, the
Yes, it
number
is.
pre First World War, perhaps. But
Yeah, very
yeah.
much so. Yeah,
Hmm. I mean, well, that would take us down a rabbit hole about, how politics have changed over the times, and obviously how, you know, easy or hard it would be to have earned it in a certain war versus another war. But I think ultimately it does come down to the man, and they're on the spot, and they've chose a course of action, and perhaps as we read these stories, we wonder, if had we been there, would we have been them, or would we have been one of the other characters in the story, as such.
indeed, indeed. It's amazing to see how the award criteria has changed unofficially. I mean, obviously, during for the Crimea, it was the only bravery award, and for some time was the only bravery award. It's interesting to note that the Indian Mutiny and the Second World War have exactly the same number of VCs awarded, 182. And that's because although the Second World War was a much wider conflict, there are a lot more awards, bravery awards available. During the Indian Mutiny, again, the VC was pretty much the only one. Also, of course, there is a little bit of these guys have kind of saved the empire, so perhaps we were a little bit generous in some instances. I would like to say, really.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's certainly a lot of different stories there. But I guess in terms of some of the men that appear in this Scottish VC's book, do you want to talk us through some of the ones that stand out, and why they stand out?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask me that, so I had a quick flip through the book to remind myself. Quite a lot of the wars seem to be for life saving, interestingly. It's quite a high proportion, but a couple I've picked out that are not is John Cruikshank, who pressed home his attack on a U-boat during the Second World War, despite being wounded by 70 times by shell splinters. Um, he pressed home his attack. He sunk the U-boat. He was awarded a medal. Interestingly, he's the only living VC holder in the book, and actually, he's the only living VC I've never met. He's 105 years old now, and I think he's held the award for longer than anyone else. He was 24, I think, at the time of the award.
Wow, that's incredible. A charmed life, it seems. 105. Who would know?
Mm,
That's crazy.
yeah,
And
indeed. Another chap, much interest in an odd way, is Hugh McInnes, who was awarded his VC for a period of 9 days during the siege of Lucknow. But despite that, there is no information of exactly what he did. We know absolutely nothing. He was one of those elected for the award under Rule 13 of the Royal Warrant, where a whole group of men can consider to have been equally brave, and they would have a ballot, and privates would vote for privates, NCOs for NCOs, and officers for officers. So that's how he got his award, but there's no record of what he actually did to earn it.
and just to clarify, when you say so his award was for 9 days, that's it's stated that for actions during a period of 9 days.
Yes, correct.
Right. Okay. Makes sense. So yeah, prolonged. I mean, obviously at Lucknow, as we know from one of our other authors, Eva Chatterjee, she's just working on a second book on the subject now. It's it's such a densely packed piece of conflict, and
Yeah.
people all over the place are committing these actions. So as you said and highlighted earlier, it must have been hard to fairly pick who gets the gong as such, and I think, as you say, that kind of nominations procedures perhaps the only way they could have done it, I suppose.
Yes. Sadly, the rule's been withdrawn now. They're no longer can no longer be awarded by ballots.
Right. Um, and obviously we mentioned earlier, so you've travelled around quite a bit, so you've been to quite a few of the grave locations.
Yeah.
I guess do any of those stand out as any in connection to this book particularly, I suppose?
Um, to this book, no. There's a fair number of unmarked graves, which is always sad. I visited in excess of must be 500 or 600 VC graves throughout the UK, Europe, even Africa, and one in America, I think.
Mm.
Gallipoli, I've seen a few there. But two that all stand out. We had the three double VCs, of course. Arthur Martin Leake, who's buried not far from where I live in Ware. So that was a treat to see his. Noel Shavas, of course, is the only Commonwealth War Graves Commission headstone to have two VCs engraved on it, being a VC and bar. It wasn't always like that. There are older pictures of the headstone with a single VC engraved on it, but at some point when it needed replacing, someone came up with the idea of let's put two on there as he had two medals. So that was a great treat to see to visit his grave.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously, we know you're ever busy, very kind of active. And you see on social media that you're visiting different places and obviously researching the next project. So what else are you working on at the moment?
Well, funny, someone asked a question on Facebook a while ago. As an author, are you already thinking about your next book? And I think my comment was, I'm already three books ahead. The US Medal of Honor Volume 1 is being edited now, so touch wood, that should be out by the end of this year. That's a set of four volumes. I have two books finished, which one of which I'll be submitting to you very shortly. But I'm currently working on a book on Napoleon's Marshals, a step away from the Victoria Cross for a little while. I'm about halfway through that. And again, I'm doing trips to visit as many of their graves as I can get in. But another idea I've got is something possibly on the Richthofen brothers in the First World War.
Okay.
Something I've been looking at. And then there's one or two other things that I've got in. Yes, I long ago planned to do a book on the raid on Saint Nazaire, but I'm now thinking to make that book into a book of raids. So it would be the Victoria Cross and Great Raids.
Hmm.
So that's also under consideration, should we say?
Yeah, 'cause I guess you would have Saint Nazaire. Saint Nazaire. What else would be in that?
Obviously, the Dams raids, Zeebrugge and the Ostend raids in the First World
Mm.
War,
Yeah.
possibly the raid on the Tirpitz.
Mm. Well, the possibilities are endless, and I think we're definitely blessed at Barnthorne that we've got several writers that are bringing these stories on the Victoria Cross to life, and we've got in a kind of a good relationship with the Victoria Cross Trust and continue to see that grow as well. So yeah, there's a yeah, it's a good place a good place to be really, and it's really exciting to read the stories and to continually learn more about these men, and ultimately they're the heroes of the tale.
Indeed they are. Indeed they are. And you guys seem to be very busy. You've got a lot of projects on. I don't know how you find the time.
Yeah, indeed. I wonder too. Um, but yeah, I guess firstly to say, obviously, thank you for taking us through that. I think you've kind of teed the book up nicely. I think it's quite clear what the book's about, the Scottish VCs, how you've selected those, and I think it's the common sense approach to do that. There's obviously loads of photos in the book where possible of these individuals and their graves or headstones, etc. And so the book's currently obviously available on our website, which is barnthornepublishing.co.uk. You can also purchase it on Amazon, particularly if you're international. The shipping tends to be a bit more economical that way. And if you'd like a signed copy, you can also get in touch with Kevin, and he'll arrange that for you. So yeah, thank you very much. If there's anything else from you, Kev, otherwise we'll call time on
Yeah,
that.
yes, you just touched on the photos in the book, and it's always been my idea to get as many grave photos in for anyone and a location for people reading the book, and if they can then, if they want, make pilgrimage to these individual graves themselves. I've read so many books where they don't even tell you at the end of the person's story where they're buried, and I just think that's absolutely crazy. You've done this guy's life story, and you don't tell us where they've ended up. Or if they do, it's in such and such a cemetery. They don't tell you the town or anything like that. And that's why I make a point of doing that, and where possible, getting as many grave photos
Mm.
in there as I can too.
And you also, I guess, in the same kind of point at that, you also mention where known the present location of the VC or perhaps part of its journey that's known as well, where it's changed hands, etc.
Yes, indeed. Of course, it's a nightmare because they're constant, well, not constantly, but they do change hands. There are some of those that still in private collections. We just don't know who has them. There are some missing ones, not many, thankfully.
Mm.
As most people are probably aware, the Lord Ashcroft Gallery is about to close at the end of May, I believe. Um, and so those medals will go out of the public eye again for how long we don't know. So it's a constant update to check before you put in a book where a medal is.
Yeah, yeah. I think obviously it's very sad news about the Ashcroft Gallery, and hopefully, common sense will prevail and a good new home will be found because it's important that people have access to them, and in the same way that you were inspired when you saw your first VC. Who's to say where that could take other people, and whether that's joining the armed forces and doing their bit, or following your steps, researching, writing about them, or even just traveling and exploring the stories. So yeah, so hopefully, if anyone's listening out there that's with a bit of oomph, hopefully we'll get a good home for them. But
Yep.
yeah, well,
Cool.
thanks again, Kev. We
No
will
problem.
end the recording now, but this will be available on YouTube from tomorrow. So yeah, thank you very much.